If you grew up watching television in the 1950s, you were likely fed a very specific diet of American history. It was an era where the brutal reality of westward expansion was repackaged into wholesome, digestible entertainment for the living room. This was the environment that gave us the pop culture version of Mike Fink. On screen, he was a lovable, loud-mouthed trickster, a comedic foil to polished frontier heroes like Davy Crockett. But the actual Mike Fink, born around 1770, was a massive, nearly 200-pound brawler. As king of the Keelboatmen, he spent his life pushing cargo boats down the treacherous Ohio and Mississippi rivers. Out here, there were no police or major settlements for hundreds of miles. Surviving the grueling manual labor of the river and the constant threat of attack required men who were utterly ruthless. Fink embraced that brutality. He liked to declare himself half horse and half cockeyed alligator, a hyper-aggressive persona designed to intimidate anyone who crossed his path. Historical records frame Fink's legendary pranks as a series of calculated displays of dominance and violence that defined the true dark nature of American riverboat culture. To understand how Fink originally earned his folk hero status, we have to look at one of his milder exploits. As the story goes, Fink was drifting down the river in need of fresh meat. He spotted a flock of sheep grazing on the shore, but he had absolutely no intention of paying for them. Instead, he tied his boat up in a quiet eddy. Under the cover of dusk, he sneaked ashore, grabbed 5 or 6 of the sheep, and aggressively rubbed a fine tobacco powder called Scotch snuff all over their noses. The animals immediately began sneezing, leaping, and behaving erratically. Fink then sent one of his men to summon the sheep's owner. When the terrified farmer arrived, Fink solemnly diagnosed the sneezing animals with the black murrain, a highly contagious and entirely fictional disease that he claimed was wiping out flocks up the river. He convinced the panicked owner that the only way to save the rest of the flock was to shoot the infected animals immediately. Fink even played hard to get, eventually agreeing to do the dirty work in exchange for a couple of gallons of peach brandy. He shot the sheep, tossed them into the river, collected his brandy, and later that night his men hauled the perfectly good meat aboard their boat. It's a grift, but it highlights the exact kind of clever, anti-authoritarian survivalism that early Americans admired. It's the kind of story that got repeated around campfires and elevated Fink into a folk hero. But there is a much darker side to his sense of humor. Fink demanded absolute compliance from his crew. If he played a joke, he expected everyone to laugh. If anyone refused, Fink would physically beat them until they did. His actions on the shore were even worse. According to historical accounts, Fink once spotted an enslaved African-American man on the riverbank. Taking aim with his rifle, Fink intentionally shot the protruding heel off the man's foot. When hauled into court, Fink didn't show remorse. Instead, he claimed the horrific act was a favor. He told the judge he shot the man so that he would finally be able to wear a genteel boot. Stripping away the folksy framing exposes the reality of Fink's humor as a performance of unchecked racism and physical intimidation, carried out by a bully who used his reputation to terrorize the vulnerable. Fink's need for absolute control eventually culminated in a recurring high-stakes game. To test the loyalty of his inner circle, he would place a tin cup of whiskey on a friend's head and shoot it off with his rifle. In 1823, Fink joined a trapping expedition up the Missouri River. During the long winter, a bitter dispute broke out between Fink and a close friend named Carpenter. Historical records suggest they were fighting over a local woman. By spring, the two men agreed to a truce. To prove their reconciliation and show mutual trust, Fink proposed they perform their old whiskey cup trick. Carpenter stepped forward and balanced the cup. Fink, who had been drinking heavily, raised his rifle, but this time he intentionally aimed low. He shot Carpenter perfectly in the center of the forehead, killing him instantly. He tried to pass it off as an accident, a trick gone wrong. But that fatal shot broke the spell of Fink's humor, exposing the core truth that his pranks were ultimately about exercising absolute power over life and death. The rest of the trapping party didn't buy the excuse. Another man on the expedition recognized it for what it was: cold-blooded murder, drew a pistol, and shot Mike Fink dead on the spot. Fink's death roughly coincided with a massive shift on the American rivers. The invention of the steamboat quickly rendered the grueling manual labor of the keelboatmen completely obsolete. As that harsh way of life vanished from the rivers, the rough men who lived it faded from memory. This left a blank canvas for dime store novelists, who easily scrubbed away the murder and brutality to sell thrilling tales of frontier bravery. By the 20th century, corporate media giants finalized the erasure. They took a racist killer and polished him into a family-friendly Disney character, complete with a catchy theme song and an amusement park ride. We often choose to remember the sanitized trickster because it celebrates a romanticized version of the pioneer spirit. But if you look at the true legacy of Mike Fink's pranks, you are forced to confront the violent, unvarnished reality of the men who actually conquered the American frontier.